this idea of treating the person and not the disease, very, very key. Now, we'll be going over disease process itself from 2 or 3 different points of view, and to try to better understand if arthritis didn't just happen one day, one just didn't wake up with full-blown arthritis, how did it get there? How do things manifest? What are earlier signs? Are there general principles that if we knew, we would better be able to guard our health? And there are general principles that we'll go over. So, arthritis is an example of a chronic illness. Now, many, many illnesses end in the word itis. Okay, hepatitis, bronchitis, cystitis, which is bladder infections or inflammations, in fact. Cholecystitis, inflammation of the gallbladder, so gallstones that can come with that. So a whole host of so-called chronic illnesses are different types of itises. And all it really says is that there's an inflammatory process going on somewhere in the body. And that's pretty much all a medical diagnosis tends to indicate, that there is some inflammatory process going on somewhere. Either it's here, so it's arthritis. If it's here, then it's bronchitis. If it's in the gut, then it's gastritis or colitis. All right? Not a whole lot of information, really, except there's an inflammation going on somewhere in the body. Now, if that's where we start off from, and don't go any further, that's what can happen. Right? You blow up. If we start off from there, and if that's where that's our diagnosis to begin with, some kind of itis, and that's all we're ever going to find out, then there's only one therapeutic avenue: stop the inflammation, right? And so find something that stops the inflammation, and since the disease was nothing more than something inflamed, if we stop the inflammation, that should be it. That's only good in theory, okay? But in actual practice, it doesn't work. And I hope you'll understand this better in a little while when we talk about the disease process itself. Because something happens when you arbitrarily clamp down on something that the body's doing without understanding it first and doing it in a certain way. If you don't guide the body away from however it is functioning towards a new, healthier way of functioning, if you don't guide it as a whole, if you just focus on a symptom or a part of the body and kind of put a clamp on it somewhere, other things happen which are not very pleasant. And medical research has, modern medical research has one major flaw, and I'd like to just point this out. Modern medical research, first of all, begins with diagnosing these diseases in people. So let's say there's 100 people that have arthritis, and maybe half of them get some anti-inflammatory drug for the joints, and inflammation is going to go down, and that's expected. And this is considered a cure. However, what else might have happened in the next 6 months, or in the next 3 months, or in the next year is not tracked. In fact, if you suppress something, something else happens. So modern medicine is, its research is not very, very good. It's not very well thought out, because it just looks at one symptom or one cluster of symptoms and says, here's the drug, oh, these symptoms are gone, the person must be better. Never mind that something else comes up. So I'll give you a few common scenarios in terms of how the body behaves. So now we begin to speak of the disease process. Most often, the disease process begins in the gut, in the gastrointestinal tract. Stomach, small intestine, large intestine, liver, gallbladder, pancreas, all the digestive organs. Okay? and it's manifest as less than perfect digestion and elimination patterns. So there's heaviness, there's gas, there's bloating, there's missed bowel movements, days without bowel movements, stools that are too loose, they're too dry, they're too thin, they're too odorous, they're difficult to evacuate. So very often this is where disease manifests to begin with. This is very early stage. And most of these things are allowed to go on because unfortunately, as part of our training, even through high school and university, we never get taught what the gut should be like, how it should behave, so that if it's not like that, we should begin to do something about it. So if nothing is done at that level, then the next level to get affected most often is the level of skin. Then things such as eczema, psoriasis, dermatitis, which just means inflammation of the skin. Dermatitis, dermis is skin, itis is inflammation. Then different types of skin manifestations occur. There may even be cyst-like manifestations just underneath the skin, so there's a lumpiness that can happen. The tissue can start holding more water than usual, so it's puffy and inflamed. Okay, so it's now no longer just in the gut, it's now in the skin and the tissue just underneath. So the skin may have an excessive dryness, it may have a perspiration that's excessive or deficient, it may have, the perspiration may have an odor which it didn't have before. So there's all these smaller signs at first that now something has reached the level of the skin, which is the next thing, which is the next level. And even here, without addressing gut, the gastrointestinal system and these organs that I mentioned, the intestines, liver and gallbladder and so on, without addressing these things, the skin symptoms won't get better, because the skin just didn't happen all by itself one day. It's part of a larger pattern that's been going on for some time. So in order to take care of these skin symptoms, it's still necessary to work with digestion and elimination. And if this is allowed to go on and the body is not guided properly and stuff is put on the skin to make it quiet, like cortisone creams and even an excessive use of herbal anti-inflammatory salves, that's not the answer either, all by itself. So if this inflammatory process, which was in the gut, now is on the layer of the skin and tissues just underneath, if that's not guided properly from there, then it's going to move to tissues that are organs and glands and joints. Okay, what started first? Where is the timeline going here? Okay, and I can tell you a timeline will almost always be going with the gut starting first, moving out to the skin and tissues just underneath the skin, and then moving deeper into organs and glands and nervous tissue. And finally, into the bone marrow itself, which is where the immune blood cells and immune cells are made in the marrow. Okay, they're in the deepest part of the body. So you might have heard of marrow replacement therapy, where they take a sample of marrow out of the hip bone right here, and they'll transfer this to someone who's been matches up properly. You know, sometimes it's a sibling, and the person has cancer or something, and they get a bone marrow donation, because in the bone marrow is where all the action is in terms of a deep immune response. That's where the immune cells are actually being made, and that's where the blood cells are made as well. So white blood cells, which are immune cells, red blood cells, which are red blood cells, these are made in the marrow. And so when that part of the body, even beyond the bone, begins to not be right, collect junk that's been eaten for 20 years, when it starts to get to that level, then that process doesn't work. It falls short of what it can do. And then there are these incredible immunocompromised systems. That every little thing is just knocking the person out for a loop. Okay, that's gone very, very deep. So gut, skin stuff, organs, glands, nervous tissue, and then finally bone marrow and very, very deep immune response. And that's how it goes. And so it's useful, no matter what stage one is at, to start with here. Always make sure that the gut's right. And as long as the gut's right, other things are, it's almost impossible for other things to happen, because that's the process that it goes through. The only time that other things happen anyway is when the mind is weak, or there's a shock in life that's so great that it rocks the body and it bypasses this process and goes right to a very, very debilitating kind of change in physiology. So it's possible to be affected right at the bone marrow level, but not necessarily due to a poor diet or lifestyle, but through something like an incredible grief or loss. You know, people can die quickly from that kind of thing. They can lose their will. And losing one's will is kind of like asking the immune system to kind of just don't bother anymore. Doesn't matter. And so it's possible to mentally change things as well, to make them better or worse. So a holistic treatment doesn't simply rely on substances, drugs, herbs, whatever, but it understands that mind and body are connected. And harnessing the power of the mind is not a little thing on the side. It's a huge thing front and center. It's not a little thing on the side. It just isn't. In fact, it's the most powerful medicine there is. It's not in a bottle, but, you know, that's all. It's just not in a bottle. We're used to calling things that are in bottles medicines, so we tend to not think this is a medicine. This is the strongest medicine there is. The ability to harness the power of one's mind and to change things in the body. Discipline and willpower and, you know, getting up and doing certain things in certain ways, that brings things back. So please don't forget that part of it. It's not just on what I can put into my body. How can I also use the mind as well?